I got home from the hospital with a plastic bracelet still on my wrist and found 28 brand new condos sitting on my property like somebody hit copy-paste on my life. The oak tree where I buried my wife's ashes was gone, cut, hauled off, and covered in fresh concrete. And the president of the Homeowners Association looked me dead in the eye and said, "It's too late now, Jack. The slab's already poured." My name's Jack Hartman, and I run a demolition outfit outside Austin Iron Core Demo and Recovery. I'm not flashy, I'm not rich, but I know equipment permits and what happens when people build where they shouldn't. That 5-acre lot next to Maple Ridge wasn't an investment. It was family ground. My dad left it to me, and after Claire passed, I chose one quiet spot under that oak, no headstone, no spotlight. Just peace. Maple Ridge, though, was the opposite of peace. Gated entry, manicured lawns, mailboxes lined up like soldiers, and an HOA board that acted like they were running a small country. The first time I met Deborah Price, she showed up at my front door with a clipboard and a smile so polished it looked expensive. "Jack," she said, like we were old friends, "we're doing some community improvements. We may need to review your lot line." I told her, "You don't have a lot line with me. I'm not in your homeowners association." Then I held up my deed like it was a stop sign. Deborah barely glanced at it. "Sometimes paperwork lags behind reality," she said, still smiling. "We're just trying to protect property values." A week later, I got a letter on Maple Ridge letterhead, official tone, bold fonts, claiming my land was neglected, unsafe, a nuisance to the community. It even listed violations on a property their HOA didn't govern. I drove to their clubhouse, asked for Deborah, and she met me in the lobby like she'd been expecting the scene. "Jack," she said softly, "don't make this adversarial." I said, "You sent me a violation notice for land you don't own. That's adversarial." Her eyes didn't blink. "We're clarifying boundaries," she replied. "If you'd like to cooperate, we can avoid escalation." Then my heart decided to throw me into the worst timing imaginable. One minute I'm on a job site, the next I'm in an ambulance, staring at the ceiling, trying to breathe through a pain that felt like a vice. 3 weeks. That's how long I was out. 3 weeks of Monitor's hospital food and my daughter Megan looking at me like she was afraid the next phone call would be the last one. When I finally got discharged, I expected to come home to laundry bills and a slower pace. I didn't expect to come home and get treated like a trespasser on my own soil. I turned onto the dirt access road I'd used my whole life, only it wasn't my road anymore. It was rutted from heavy trucks, lined with orange cones, and blocked by a temporary fence with a no-entry construction sign. 2 private security guys stepped out like they'd rehearsed it. One of them put a hand near his pepper spray and said, "Sir, you need to leave." I stared past them and saw framed walls, row after row, fresh lumber Tyvek wrap flapping in the wind. I said, "This is my land." The older guard shrugged. "According to our records, this belongs to Maple Ridge." My throat went dry, the way it does right before you get angry. "Your records are wrong," I said, and started walking anyway. That's when I saw the concrete pad where the oak used to be. Not a stump, not a marker. Just a gray slab, smooth, new, confident, like it had always been there. I drove straight to Deborah's house, parked out front, and rang the bell until she answered. She opened the door in a cream sweater like she'd been baking cookies instead of stealing ground. "Jack," she said, calm as Sunday, "you should be resting." I said, "Where is my oak tree?" Deborah tilted her head. The development required clearing. The contractors followed the plan. I felt my jaw tighten. That tree was on my property. She stepped onto the porch like she owned the air. "It's too late," she said. "The slab's already poured. If you want to discuss compensation, the board can be flexible." Flexible, like this was a parking ticket. The next day, I pulled my paperwork, every survey and plat map I'd ever kept, and called a land surveyor I trusted, Nina Parker. Nina's the kind of person who doesn't waste your time with drama. She just measures documents and tells you what's real. She walked the boundary with her gear-marked points, and then looked at me like she'd just solved the puzzle nobody wanted solved. "Jack," she said, "your deed is solid. And there's something else." She showed me the utility easement, an old drainage corridor running through the exact section where the new condos were going up. If they poured over this without approval, Nina said they're not just in a boundary dispute, they're in a compliance nightmare. That night, Maple Ridge held a community meeting. Deborah made sure I got a front-row invitation like I was the entertainment. The clubhouse was packed, neighbors sipping water from little plastic cups, board members sitting at a table like judges. Deborah stood at the front with a microphone wearing a red blazer like she'd dressed for a victory lap. She talked about beautification. She talked about safety. She talked about protecting the neighborhood. Then she pointed at me, smiling. "We understand Mr. Hartman has concerns about the project." Concerns, like I was upset about paint color. I stood up and held my deed in the air. "My concern," I said, "is you're building houses on my land." A guy in the second row, Todd Reynolds, I recognized him from the board's emails, snorted loud enough for people to hear. "Finally, someone cleaned up that eyesore," he said. Deborah lifted a hand like she was calming a child. "Jack," she said into the mic, "your documents reference older boundary descriptions. We're working from updated community records." I said, "Updated by who you?" Her smile didn't crack, but her tone tightened. "We are offering a fair resolution. You could accept compensation and avoid costly legal action." There it was out in the open. Not a mistake, a plan. I walked out with a room full of people staring at me like I was the problem. In the parking lot, Megan grabbed my sleeve and said, "Dad, please, you just got out of the hospital. They've got lawyers and money. Don't let them crush you." I sat in my truck for a long minute, hands on the wheel, trying to feel my heartbeat without getting mad at it. Part of me wanted to slam the door on the whole thing, sell the lot, take the check, protect my health, protect my family. And then I pictured that oak again, the place I chose because it was quiet and mine. That wasn't something I could compensate and move on from. So I stopped thinking like a guy who got robbed and started thinking like a guy who knows how projects get shut down. First move was simple. I put concrete barriers across the access road, my access road, and posted private property, no trespassing. I didn't yell. I didn't threaten. I just used the same rules construction sites use every day. Within an hour, a supervisor came stomping over hard hat, tilted back, face red. "You can't do this," he snapped. "We've got trucks scheduled." I said, "You can't build on land that isn't yours. And you're not using my road." He waved a phone in my face. "I'll call the HOA." "Great," I said. "Tell them I'm documenting everything. Also tell them my surveyor found your easement problem." That's when the calls started. Deborah, the board, a law firm with a friendly receptionist and a not-friendly voicemail. Letters showed up with heavier paper and sharper language. Then Deborah tried the classic pressure play police at my door. 2 officers showed up, polite but firm, saying they got a complaint about harassment and interference with construction. I didn't argue. I pulled up my security footage and showed them the security guards blocking me from my own lot. Then I showed them a drone hovering over my backyard the night before launching from the Maple Ridge Clubhouse parking lot. One of the officers raised his eyebrows like he was suddenly tired of being used as a prop. They left without warning me. Deborah didn't like that. She doubled down. She announced a ribbon-cutting date, plastered signs around the community, and scheduled the grand opening right over the spot where my oak used to stand. That was the moment I stopped treating it like a dispute and started treating it like an illegal build with a countdown clock. Nina pulled records. I called the county utility office about the drainage easement. I talked to an inspector who owed me a favor from an old job where we cleared a hazardous structure fast and clean. And I made one more call, Carlos Vega, my field lead at Iron Core. Friday, I told him. Early, no logos, bring the equipment. Friday morning, Maple Ridge looked like a commercial. Balloons, folding chairs, a little podium with a microphone. Deborah standing tall in her red blazer, smiling at a local realtor like she'd personally invented housing. I parked just outside the crowd and walked in wearing work boots and a plain jacket. My heart was beating hard and not in a way I liked, but my hands were steady. Deborah saw me and her smile sharpened. "Jack," she said through gritted teeth, "this is not the time." I stepped up near the podium and said loud enough for the front rows, "Actually, it's exactly the time." She lifted the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen," a low rumble cut her off. Diesel engines, heavy treads, the sound you don't ignore if you've ever been near real machinery. Heads turned. People stood. And then my excavator rolled into view behind the staging area, followed by a loader, slow, controlled professional. Carlos kept it clean, just like I asked. Deborah's face drained. "You can't be serious," she hissed. I held up a folder and said, "I'm serious. This property belongs to Jack Hartman. You are trespassing. and your development sits on a drainage easement you didn't have approval to build over." Todd Reynolds shouted, "This is vandalism." I didn't even look at him. "It's enforcement," I said. "The county has been notified, and I have an emergency order pending inspection." Deborah tried to grab the microphone back like it was a weapon. "You're threatening the community," she snapped. "Security." I leaned in close enough that only she could hear me and said, "Calm. You threatened my life's work while I was in a hospital bed." Then I stepped back and raised my hand one signal. Carlos didn't rush it. He didn't make a show. The excavator's bucket pressed into the side of the model unit, and the wall gave way with a clean cracked drywall and studs folding like cardboard under a force that didn't care about Deborah's clipboard. People gasped. Someone screamed. Phones went up like fireworks. Deborah stood frozen, mouth open, and for the first time since I'd met her, there was no smile, no polished tone, just panic. I turned to the crowd and said, "This didn't happen by accident. Your board took land that wasn't theirs, bulldozed a memorial, and tried to buy my silence. If they did it to me, they can do it to you." That's when the murmurs turned into anger, real anger. Not my anger, theirs. And Deborah, the queen of rules, suddenly had nothing but excuses. By the end of that day, the county had inspectors on site. The utility office was calling. Lawyers and Maple Ridge residents were demanding an emergency meeting without Deborah controlling the agenda. I didn't stay for the speeches. I didn't stick around to watch the board scramble. All I needed was the moment I heard through the grapevine. Deborah Price was voted out, escorted out of the clubhouse, and left standing in the parking lot with her red blazer and her clipboard, finally looking like someone who couldn't bully her way out of consequences. Lesson learned: when someone steals your ground with paperwork and a smile, don't just get mad. Get proof, get smart, and make them answer for it.